A homeless veteran and his German shepherd slept inside an abandoned train station for weeks, until one freezing night the dog started barking at a cracked wall behind Platform 3. Ethan smashed through the plaster and found a rusted metal box hiding a letter written 90 years ago. His hands shook when he read the first line. To my grandson, if you are reading this, they failed to erase our family. Suddenly, the old station wasn't random anymore. The dog kept staring down the dark tunnel as distant train horns echoed through tracks that had been dead since 1952. And Ethan realized someone had been waiting for him to come home. Some places do not stay empty by accident. The first time Ethan Walker saw the old train station, snow was blowing through the broken windows like ghosts searching for warmth. The building stood alone beside a dead stretch of railroad outside a forgotten Pennsylvania town, nearly 3 miles from the nearest gas station and hidden behind a line of black pine trees that swayed under the December wind. Most people passed the place without slowing down. The faded station sign had fallen years ago, and the tracks hadn't carried a passenger train since 1952. But Rex stopped walking the second they reached the platform. The German shepherd stood perfectly still beneath the flickering glow of a dying street lamp, ears raised toward the darkness ahead. Ethan tightened his old army coat against the cold and looked down at the dog. You hear something, buddy? Rex didn't move. Snow crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he stepped closer to the entrance. One of the station doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, moving slightly whenever the wind pushed through. The smell inside hit him first. Wet wood, dust, old iron, the scent of time sitting still for too long. Ethan had slept in shelters before, under bridges, behind churches, once inside an abandoned delivery truck for almost 2 weeks during a January storm outside Cleveland. But this place felt different, quieter somehow, not peaceful, just waiting. Rex walked ahead slowly, claws tapping against cracked tile floors covered in decades of dirt. Every sound echoed through the empty station. Somewhere deep inside the building, water dripped steadily into metal. Ethan set down his backpack beside an old wooden bench near what used to be the ticket counter. The ceiling above them creaked softly. Wind whispered through broken glass. Not exactly the Hilton, Ethan muttered, pulling a worn blanket from his pack. Rex ignored him. The dog kept staring down the long hallway leading toward the old boarding platforms. Ethan noticed it then. A single light hanging near the far end of the corridor. Faint, yellow, flickering softly. He frowned. There shouldn't have been electricity. He walked closer, breath visible in the freezing air. But before he reached the hallway, the light vanished completely. Darkness swallowed the corridor again. Ethan stopped moving. His heartbeat slowed into the old rhythm he remembered from overseas. Watch. Listen. Wait. Rex let out a low growl from behind him. Not aggressive. Uneasy. Ethan turned toward the dog. Easy. The station groaned around them as wind rattled somewhere above the ceiling beams. Then came the sound. Far away at first, barely noticeable beneath the storm. A train horn. Long, low. Hollow. Ethan froze. The tracks outside had been dead for over 70 years. Rex suddenly rushed toward the hallway, barking sharply before stopping beside a locked door near the end. His paws scratched hard against the floorboards. Ethan followed slowly, his boots stirring clouds of dust into the cold air. The door beside Rex had a faded brass plate barely hanging by one screw. Ethan wiped away the grime with his sleeve. Station master. Beneath the door, something moved softly from the other side. Ethan stared at the darkness underneath the frame. Then came 3 slow knocks from inside the room. Not loud, not violent, just 3 careful knocks, like someone had been waiting a very long time for them to arrive. Ethan did not touch the door right away. The 3 knocks still echoed faintly through the hallway as snow hissed against the broken station windows behind him. Rex stood frozen beside the old station master door, muscles tight beneath his dark fur, eyes fixed on the narrow crack under the frame. Ethan slowly reached for the rusted handle. Cold metal pressed against his palm. He turned it carefully. Locked. The hallway fell silent again. Even the wind outside seemed farther away now. Ethan leaned closer and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just the smell of damp wood and old dust trapped inside the walls for decades. Rex suddenly stepped backward and let out another low growl. Ethan looked down the corridor. For a second, he thought he saw someone standing near the far platform entrance. Tall, motionless. Then lightning flashed outside the broken windows, and the figure disappeared into darkness. "You are getting tired, Walker," he whispered to himself. He had not slept properly in days. The cold always made old memories worse. He walked back toward the waiting area and sat heavily on the wooden bench beside his backpack. The station creaked around them like an old ship floating somewhere far from shore. Rex refused to lie down. The dog kept pacing between Ethan and the hallway, back and forth, watching, listening. Around midnight, Ethan finally drifted asleep beneath the blanket with Rex curled near his boots. But sometime later, a loud metallic clang jerked him awake. His eyes snapped open. Darkness covered the station. The small flashlight beside his backpack had rolled onto the floor. Rex stood near the ticket counter, staring toward the far wall behind it. Another clang echoed softly through the station, metal striking metal somewhere deep inside the building. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and stood slowly, joints aching from the cold. "Rex!" The dog moved toward the counter immediately. Ethan followed the beam of the flashlight across faded train schedules still hanging crooked on the walls. Old advertisements peeled from the plaster in curled layers. Dust floated through the weak light like smoke. Then he noticed something strange behind the counter. Fresh scratches, long marks cutting through the dirt on the floorboards, as if something heavy had been dragged recently. Ethan crouched lower. The scratches led directly toward a tall wooden cabinet shoved against the wall. Rex planted himself beside it and barked once. Sharp, focused. Ethan frowned. "What are you trying to show me?" The cabinet barely moved at first. Its legs groaned against the floor as Ethan pushed harder. Dust exploded into the air. Behind it sat a narrow steel locker hidden inside the wall itself, almost completely covered by decades of grime. Ethan stared at it in silence. The locker door carried faded gold lettering nearly erased by time. Willow Creek Station Storage Unit 3. Beneath the words hung a small silver lock, blackened with age. Rex suddenly pressed his nose against the locker and whined softly. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan slowly touched the cold steel surface. The metal felt strangely warmer than the freezing room around him. Then his flashlight flickered once, twice, and somewhere outside in the storm, a train horn echoed across the dead tracks again. The storm finally weakened sometime before dawn, but Ethan never opened the locker that night. He sat beside it for hours with Rex curled against his boots, listening to the old station breathe around them. Every now and then the pipes inside the walls clicked softly, followed by distant sounds that almost resembled footsteps somewhere overhead. By morning, pale winter light pushed through the broken windows and covered the station in a cold gray glow. Dust drifted through the air like frozen smoke. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the steel locker again. The silver lock hanging from it looked ancient, but not rusted shut like everything else inside the building. That bothered him. Somebody had touched it at some point. Maybe years ago. Maybe recently. Rex stood up suddenly and walked toward the hallway leading to the platforms. Ethan followed him outside. Snow covered the tracks in smooth white lines stretching into the trees. The station looked even older in daylight. Paint peeled from the walls in long faded strips, and part of the roof above Platform 2 had collapsed years earlier. Yet something about the place still felt cared for. Ethan noticed fresh footprints in the snow near the far end of the platform. Small footprints. Not his. Not Rex's. He crouched lower. The prints led toward the woods before disappearing beneath drifting snow. Rex sniffed the ground carefully, then looked back toward the station entrance with his ears raised. Ethan felt the strange pressure return to his chest, the feeling that somebody was watching from somewhere nearby. He walked back inside slowly. Near the entrance, an old newspaper machine leaned against the wall, frozen in place beside a cracked payphone. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small multi-tool he carried everywhere. He knelt beside the locker and inserted the narrow edge into the lock. "Let us see what you were guarding," he whispered. The metal clicked after only a few seconds. Too easily. Ethan paused. Then he slowly pulled the locker door open. A wave of cold air drifted out from inside, carrying the faint scent of cedar wood and old paper. The beam from his flashlight revealed a small collection of objects resting neatly on the bottom shelf. A pocket watch, a folded railroad map, a faded photograph tied with twine, and beneath them, a dark green envelope sealed with red wax that had cracked with age. Rex immediately focused on the photograph. The dog whined softly and nudged Ethan's hand. Ethan picked it up carefully. The black and white picture showed a family standing beside the station sometime in the 1930s. A man in a long wool coat stood near the center holding the hand of a little boy no older than 5. Behind them, the station looked alive. Bright windows, crowds of passengers, fresh paint. Ethan stared at the man's face. Something about him felt painfully familiar. The shape of the jaw, the tired eyes, even the slight scar near his chin. Ethan slowly turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink were 4 words. Willow Creek belongs to us. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Outside, wind moved through the dead tracks with a low, hollow whistle. Rex suddenly stepped backward from the locker and barked toward the station entrance. Ethan looked up just as he heard the front door creak open on its own. A woman stood there silently in the falling snow. Elderly, thin, wrapped in a long dark coat. Her eyes locked onto Ethan first, then the photograph in his hands. The color slowly drained from her face. "Dear God," she whispered softly. "You look exactly like him." The woman remained near the doorway while snow drifted quietly behind her. She looked at Ethan the same way people look at something they never expected to see again. Her eyes moved slowly from his face to the photograph in his hands, and then toward the open locker behind him. Rex stood alert beside Ethan, but did not bark this time. The old dog simply watched her carefully, tail still, ears raised toward every sound in the station. "Who are you?" Ethan finally asked. The woman swallowed hard before stepping inside. Her boots echoed softly against the cracked floor tiles. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said quietly. "I grew up here, back when trains still came through Willow Creek every day." Her voice carried the weight of memory, gentle and worn with time. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly beneath her gloves. Clara looked toward the photograph again. "That man," she whispered. "The one standing beside the little boy. His name was Samuel Whitmore." The station seemed colder after she said the name out loud. Somewhere above them, old pipes clicked softly behind the walls. Ethan glanced back at the photograph. "You knew him?" Clara gave a faint nod. Everybody knew the Whitmores back then. They built this station, owned most of the railroad line running through 3 counties. Her eyes drifted slowly across the empty building. This place used to shine at night. Brass rails polished every morning. Crowds so thick you could barely hear yourself think. She smiled sadly for a moment before the expression faded. Then one winter, Samuel disappeared. Ethan frowned. Disappeared? Clara pulled off one glove carefully. Age spots covered her pale fingers. 1936. Right before Christmas. Folks said he ran away. Others believed he was killed somewhere out west. But nobody ever found him. Rex suddenly walked toward Clara and sniffed gently at her coat before sitting beside her feet. The old woman looked down at the dog with surprise. "German Shepherd," she whispered softly. Samuel had one too. Ethan felt a strange chill move through him. Outside, wind rattled loose metal somewhere near the tracks. Clara slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded newspaper clipping, yellow with age. She handed it carefully to Ethan. The headline read, "Local railroad heir vanishes without trace." Beneath the title sat a grainy photograph of Samuel Whitmore standing beside this very station almost 90 years earlier. Ethan stared at the image. The resemblance unsettled him now. Same eyes, same jawline. Even the scar near the chin appeared in the exact same place. Clara watched his reaction carefully. "When I first saw you standing here," she said quietly, "I thought maybe I was seeing a ghost." Ethan let out a dry breath. "You were telling me I look like some railroad man who vanished before World War II. "No," Clara replied softly. "I am telling you that you look like family." Silence settled heavily between them. The station groaned around the 3 of them as snow continued falling outside the broken windows. Ethan looked back inside the locker again. The green envelope still rested untouched beneath the map and pocket watch. The red wax seal carried a symbol pressed into its surface. A small train surrounded by the letters W and C, Willow Creek. Clara saw the envelope and suddenly went pale. "Oh no," she whispered. "I never thought that letter still existed." Ethan looked at her sharply. "What letter?" Clara stepped backward slowly, fear rising into her tired eyes for the first time. "The letter Samuel left behind the night he vanished." Clara lowered herself carefully onto the old wooden bench near the ticket counter while Ethan continued staring at the sealed envelope inside the locker. Snow tapped softly against the station windows, and the weak daylight outside had already begun fading beneath thick winter clouds. Rex lay quietly near Ethan's feet now, though his eyes never left the green envelope. The old woman rubbed her hands together slowly, as if trying to warm memories she had carried too long. "Samuel Whitmore was not supposed to leave anything behind," she said softly. "After he disappeared, men came here asking questions for months. Railroad investigators, lawyers, even people from Chicago." Ethan looked toward her. "Why?" Clara hesitated before answering. "Because the Whitmore family owned more than trains. They own land, banks, factories. Samuel's father built half this county during the railroad boom." Her tired eyes drifted across the station walls again. But Samuel was different. He cared more about people than money. Folks trusted him. Ethan picked up the pocket watch from the locker and opened it carefully. The hands had stopped at exactly 11:17. Inside the cover, small engraved words shimmered beneath the flashlight beam. "To my son, always find your way home." Ethan frowned slightly. Something about those words tugged at a memory buried deep inside him. A voice from childhood. A woman humming softly in a dark kitchen. He could almost hear it. Rex suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the far hallway again. Ethan noticed it too. The faint sound of a train bell echoing somewhere deep inside the station. One ring, then silence. Clara closed her eyes briefly. That bell used to ring every night at 11:17 before the last train arrived from Pittsburgh, she whispered. Ethan slowly looked back at the frozen watch in his hand. 11:17. The station creaked gently around them. Dust drifted through the fading light. Clara took a slow breath before continuing. The night Samuel vanished, people said there was an argument inside this station. Nobody knew exactly what happened. But after that night, the Whitmore family started falling apart. Ethan reached carefully for the green envelope. The paper felt brittle beneath his fingers. The red wax seal carried the same railroad symbol stamped on the station walls outside. Willow Creek Rail Company. Clara watched nervously. "I never saw the letter myself," she admitted quietly. "But my father did. He worked maintenance here back then. He said Samuel left instructions that nobody was supposed to open it unless—" Her voice trailed off. "Unless what?" Ethan asked. Clara looked directly into his eyes for the first time. "Unless the rightful heir returned to the station." Silence settled heavily over the room. Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the photograph. Maybe the watch. Or maybe the strange feeling that had followed him since the moment Rex refused to walk past this place. Ethan slowly broke the wax seal. The sound seemed unnaturally loud inside the empty station. He unfolded the letter carefully. The paper crackled with age. The handwriting inside was elegant and steady despite the years. Ethan read the first line silently. Then his breathing stopped for a moment, because written at the top of the page were words he somehow already knew before seeing them. "If my family has found this letter, then the station remembered you before the world did." Rex stood immediately and walked toward the dark hallway leading to platform 3. This time, Ethan noticed something else. A faint yellow light glowing once more at the far end of the corridor. The yellow light at the end of the hallway flickered softly like a lantern moving through fog. Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket while Rex walked ahead toward platform 3 without hesitation. Clara remained near the bench, her pale face filled with worry. "You should not go down there alone," she said quietly. Ethan stopped halfway down the corridor and looked back at her. "Down where?" Clara swallowed hard. "There used to be maintenance tunnels beneath the station. Samuel spent weeks hiding down there before he vanished." The old station groaned as wind swept across the roof overhead. Somewhere far outside, loose metal clanged against the frozen tracks. Ethan glanced toward the flickering light again. "You knew about the tunnels?" Clara nodded slowly. "Most people forgot they existed after the railroad shut down. But Samuel believed the station protected things." Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Secrets. People. Sometimes both." Rex barked once from the end of the hallway. Ethan turned and followed him deeper into the station. The air grew colder with every step. Layers of dust covered the floor untouched for years, except for faint marks Ethan now noticed near the walls. Scratches. Fresh ones. almost like claws dragging lightly across old wood. The flickering yellow light came from a single bulb hanging above a rusted service door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. Electricity should not have been working anywhere in the building. Yet the bulb swayed gently overhead, humming softly in the silence. Rex pressed his nose against the bottom of the door and scratched twice. Ethan reached for the handle carefully. Locked again, but this time a key already sat inside the lock. Old brass, worn smooth with age. Ethan froze when he noticed the engraving on the key head. The same railroad symbol from the envelope seal. Willow Creek Rail Company. That is impossible, Clara whispered from behind him. Ethan had not even heard her walk closer. My father said Samuel carried that key the night he disappeared. Ethan slowly turned the key. The lock clicked open instantly. A breath of freezing air rolled out from the darkness beyond the door, carrying the scent of wet stone and machine oil. Rex stepped inside first. Ethan followed carefully with his flashlight raised. Narrow concrete stairs disappeared beneath the station into darkness. Water dripped somewhere below in slow, steady echoes. The yellow bulb behind them flickered harder once, then went dark completely. Only Ethan's flashlight remained. Clara stayed near the doorway above. There should be a generator room at the bottom, she called softly, and old storage rooms beneath platform 3. Ethan descended carefully while Rex moved ahead through the shadows with unusual confidence. The deeper they went, the stranger the station sounded above them. Pipes hummed faintly through the walls. Distant vibrations rattled the ceiling like train wheels rolling over tracks far overhead. Ethan reached the bottom step and swept the flashlight across the underground corridor. Dust covered everything except one narrow path leading deeper into the tunnel. Someone had walked there recently. Rex stopped beside a rusted metal sign hanging crooked from the wall. Storage Room C. Ethan pushed open the heavy door. Inside sat shelves lined with old train ledgers, wooden crates, and maintenance tools left untouched for decades. But at the far end of the room stood something else. A large black safe built directly into the concrete wall. Ethan stepped closer slowly. The safe door already stood, slightly open, and resting on the floor directly in front of it was a second photograph, newer than the others, cleaner somehow. Ethan picked it up carefully. His breath caught instantly. The photograph showed a woman holding a baby outside this same station in 1937. Written across the bottom in faded blue ink were words that made Ethan's chest tighten. For Elizabeth and the boy. Keep them hidden. The underground room felt colder after Ethan read the words beneath the photograph. Rex stood beside the open safe now, staring into the darkness inside as though waiting for Ethan to notice something else. Water dripped steadily from old pipes overhead, each sound echoing through the concrete tunnels beneath the station. Ethan carefully placed the photograph into his coat pocket beside Samuel's letter. Elizabeth, he whispered softly. The name stirred another memory somewhere deep inside him. Not clear enough to understand. Just fragments. A lullaby. A woman's voice near a kitchen window during winter. Rex suddenly stepped forward and nudged the safe door wider with his nose. Metal groaned softly against concrete. Ethan lifted the flashlight. Inside the safe rested several leather folders stacked neatly beside a wooden box covered in dust. Clara slowly entered the room behind him, breathing heavily from the stairs. The moment her eyes landed on the folders, she stopped completely. Those records were never found, she whispered. Ethan pulled one folder free and opened it carefully. Inside sat railroad deeds, property maps, bank papers, and newspaper clippings dating back almost 90 years. One yellow document immediately caught his attention. Change of guardianship. He frowned and held it closer beneath the flashlight beam. The document described a child being transferred under a new surname in February of 1937. The original family name had been blacked out by hand, but the replacement name remained visible. Walker. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Clara covered her mouth slowly with trembling fingers. Dear Lord, she whispered. Ethan stared silently at the paper while old memories began surfacing one after another. His mother refusing to answer questions about their family history. His grandfather never speaking about his childhood. The old pocket watch Ethan once saw hidden inside a dresser drawer when he was 7 years old. He remembered the exact same railroad symbol engraved on the cover. My grandfather, Ethan murmured. His last name was Walker too. Clara nodded weakly. Then Samuel's family survived. The station rumbled faintly above them, followed by the distant sound of wind moving across the empty tracks outside. Ethan opened another folder. This one contained handwritten letters tied together with faded ribbon. The top letter had been addressed to Elizabeth Whitmore. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The handwriting matched Samuel's letter upstairs. Elizabeth, if they discover the boy's real name, they will come for him too. The railroad board already believes I stole company assets before I vanished. I did not. Someone inside the family betrayed us. Keep our son hidden. Change his name. One day, when the station calls him home, he will understand everything. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. His hands had started shaking. Rex walked closer and rested his head gently against Ethan's leg. The warmth of the dog grounded him for a moment. Clara stared at Ethan with tears forming quietly in her eyes. Samuel did not abandon his family, she whispered. He protected them. Ethan looked around the underground room again. The shelves, the ledgers, the hidden safe buried beneath decades of silence. This was never a random shelter. Somehow, without knowing why, he had come back to the exact place his bloodline had once tried desperately to hide from the world. Then Rex suddenly barked sharply toward the far end of the tunnel. Ethan raised the flashlight quickly. At first he saw only darkness beyond the storage room doorway. Then the beam caught something moving slowly near the tracks deeper underground. A man, tall, wearing a dark railroad coat. He stood perfectly still at the end of the tunnel for only a second before disappearing into shadow. Clara gasped softly behind him. That cannot be, she whispered. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, heart pounding hard against his chest. Because before the figure vanished, he had seen the silver watch chain hanging from the man's coat pocket. Ethan moved down the tunnel before Clara could stop him. The flashlight beam shook slightly in his hand while Rex ran several feet ahead, claws clicking sharply against the damp concrete floor. The underground passage curved beneath the station like the inside of some forgotten machine, lined with rusted pipes and electrical panels covered in dust. Yet the deeper Ethan went, the more signs he noticed that someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints marked the thin layer of dirt along the tunnel floor. A lantern sat beside the wall farther ahead with melted candle wax still soft near the base. Ethan slowed his breathing and listened carefully. Somewhere beyond the darkness, he could hear the faint ticking of metal. Tick, 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 like an old watch counting seconds underground. Rex stopped suddenly near a narrow opening in the wall and growled softly. Ethan raised the flashlight. The tunnel opened into a hidden platform buried beneath the station itself. His breath caught instantly. Old train tracks stretched through the darkness below ground, perfectly preserved despite the decades above. Wooden benches still sat beside the platform untouched by time. A faded station clock hung overhead frozen at exactly 11:17. Ethan stepped closer slowly. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam like falling snow. Then he saw the man again standing at the opposite end of the underground platform. Tall, motionless, railroad coat hanging neatly around his shoulders. The silver watch chain reflected faintly in the darkness. Ethan could not see the man's face clearly, but something inside him tightened painfully anyway. Recognition, not fear. Who are you? Ethan called softly. The figure did not answer. Instead, he lifted one arm slowly and pointed toward an old train car resting silently on the tracks nearby. The car looked impossible. Clean windows, intact paint, brass lettering that still shimmered faintly beneath decades of darkness. Willow Creek Private Line. Rex barked once and sprinted toward the train car. Ethan followed immediately, but halfway across the platform, the overhead lights flickered alive for one brief second. Warm golden light flooded the underground station exactly as it must have looked nearly 90 years earlier. Ethan froze completely. For that single moment, the station was no longer abandoned. He saw passengers standing beside the tracks in old-fashioned coats, porters loading luggage carts, steam rolling across the platform floor, a little boy laughing near the benches while a German shepherd sat beside him. Then darkness returned instantly. Silence crashed back over everything. Ethan stared around in disbelief. The people were gone. Only the empty underground platform remained. Rex stood waiting beside the old train car door now, tail moving slowly for the first time since they arrived. Ethan approached carefully. The train car door stood slightly open. Inside rested polished wood seats coated in thin layers of dust. A small lantern still hung near the ceiling. And on the center table sat one final object waiting untouched beside the window. A leather journal. Ethan opened it slowly,